All right.
Okay. So now it is working. I don't know what the deal was. So
And
I'm
it's
going live on Facebook now.
cool.
So share on the group.
Let's see here. Kettlebell Almanac.
Okay. Okay. So we are live on Facebook now. We'll give everybody, because we still have a couple minutes before we're actually supposed to start. So I'm going to step away for 2 minutes and then I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, Steve. Like I said, we'll just wait a couple more minutes and I'll get started. So, and that'll give some people some time to start watching.
I'm on the Almanac page, you said?
Yes, it's going to be on the Kettlebell Almanac page.
Uh-huh.
It's super strange on my end because I'm like watching the Facebook screen, which is slightly delayed. I probably shouldn't look at it. Okay, guys, so I'm here today with Steve Cotter. He was kind enough to come on and talk about the modern history of kettlebell sport. I think I've known Steve for going on maybe 11 years. Does that sound right?
Yeah, like we got in Novi at that day, like 2000 no, 2011. Yeah. Yeah.
Something like that.
So 11 years.
Okay. So Steve, you just want to get started and kind of talk to us about where you started in kettlebell, what got you into doing kettlebell sport, and kind of what led you up to kind of where you are today, which, really you're kind of an international star. You've written a bunch of books. You have, I think you have a new jiu-jitsu video program out. Is that correct, for stretching and?
Yeah, sure. So I came out with a few new programs, mobility and flexibility, and also kettlebells, focusing on introducing that to the world.
Okay, so just talk to us about where you got started, really.
So I started thinking kettlebells early on when it was just brand new here in the United States. So like 2001, I started seeing these advertisement in a catalog called Vitalix, which was a quarterly, at that time, it was a quarterly catalog that I would receive in the mail from Dragon Door Publications. And I was a subscriber to the Dragon Door Publications because they used to put out information and products related to the martial arts, related to especially the internal martial arts like Tai Chi and Qigong. And I was practicing those and I had an interest in those. And prior to seeing the kettlebells, it was mostly just the martial art information. And then I started seeing these advertisements of this guy Pavel, right? Everybody knows Pavel, but Pavel Satsaline, and he had this stretching. I think the first one was a flexibility course called Beyond Stretching. He was doing the splits. I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool. And then that same year there was a product called the Power to the People, which was him doing like a one arm press with a barbell. And then towards the end of that year, or 2002, is when I started seeing this kettlebell. It was the original RKC video, which was the Russian kettlebell challenge. And something drew me to that. Oh, that's really cool. And, the advertisements were compelling, talking about how, martial arts and weightlifters and, Soviet military were using the kettlebell. And coming from the martial arts, that was interesting to me. And at that time, previous to seeing the kettlebell, I had been going to the gym and pretty much following like bodybuilding protocols that I get from like Muscle Media, Muscle Media magazine. And I never really felt like that type of training in the gym, using the machines or using the barbells. I had no formal training, but it was kind of like, okay, what's Arnold Schwarzenegger encyclopedia? What are they doing, right? And so just following that, and I got more defined, but I never felt like it made me a better athlete or a better mover or better martial artist. And so I had definitely had a curiosity about Olympic lifting. I thought Olympic lifting would be a great complement because of the explosive power, but there was really not Olympic lifting was not widespread, and there was no, it was before CrossFit really was around, and the closest Olympic coach was like an hour north of where I live in San Diego, so that wasn't realistic to train in that. So I thought the kettlebell, I was like, wow, this seems really cool. But at first I didn't, it was probably almost a year until I finally got my own kettlebells. At that time they were really expensive. I think it was like $189 for like a 32 kilo, or maybe for like a 16, it was like $160, something like that.
So what was the first weight that you bought? What size was the first bell you bought?
Weight, I ordered a 16 and a 24. And so I was still teaching at that time. I was still teaching Kung Fu, but on the weekends I was teaching at a park by my house. And I remember bringing the catalog to the park, and I showed my students. I was like, hey, this looks really cool. And like 2 weeks later, one of the students came to the park, and he had bought some kettlebells, and he bought them. And that was the first time I ever touched one. And I just did like a swing. I hadn't seen it, but I just kind of, from the pictures in the advertisement, I just kind of figured out, okay, do this. And I felt immediately from the ground up this connectivity. And immediately I was like, wow, that feels really cool. And so that day I went home and I ordered the two kettlebells. Now that I had felt it, I was like, and now I have to have them. And I ordered a 16 and a 24. My student actually burned me a copy of the VHS that Pavel had, the Russian Kettlebell Challenge VHS. And so I just stayed at home, and every day I was, following that video and doing the movements. It was pretty rudimentary. Um, After about a week, I was like, man, I need a heavier kettlebell. I ordered a 32. Now, at that time, there was no Kettlebell Sport. There was like, he talked about Kettlebell Sport, but what he was showing, and what everyone was doing at that time, it wasn't Kettlebell Sport. It was basically RKC. It was like, okay, you're going to do 5 reps or 10 reps and put it down. And I do like 10 reps with the 16 and 10 reps with the 24, 10 reps with the 32. It was like that. And then do the next exercise. Okay, clean. Later, they started calling it hard style, right? So that was kind of what was available information at that time. And I just trained on my own. I had recently graduated. I had just finished my degree in kinesiology. So coming out of university, I was like, well, I'll be a personal trainer. Prior to that, my first career was just from 15 years old. I was teaching martial arts, and that was my job. And then at 27, I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I'm going to go to university. And then I got out of university when I was 31. And I started doing personal training. There was no kettlebells anywhere. So I was bringing kettlebells in my car to the gym and introducing those to my clients. So that's kind of my early history.
The question is in your car, were you using the seatbelt trick yet, or were you just letting them roll around in the back?
I was actually, I wasn't doing the seatbelt yet. I figured that out after a few abrupt starts. Yeah, I think I was putting him in milk crates at that time. But yeah, the seatbelt was the one after that. And yeah, so I met Pavel. He came out to San Diego in like early 2003. He organized this event called the Tactical Strength Challenge. And it was with a 32 kilo. It was doing pull-ups, as many pull-ups as you could do, as many snatches as you can do with one hand change, and then as many pistol squats as you could do on each leg. And Brett Jones was there, so I met Brett, and there was a few other guys competing. And so I won on the pistol. That was my event that I did really well. I did like 15 each leg with the 32. And then Pavel after was like, oh wow, then we did like this movement thing at the end, going like ducking under these like posts, like squatting and ducking under. And I was doing real quick, easy with that, because like Kung Fu, where I was doing these low movements. And Paul was like, oh, you're flexible as well. And so he invited me out to Minnesota at that meeting. He's like, I want to invite you to our RKC certification. I was excited about that. And that was like 2 months later. And so I went out there. I started looking at the Dragon Door forum. At that time, internet was pretty new for me. It was, I think, pretty new for all of us. I was just getting online like 2003. And I started looking at the RKC forum, and people were always putting questions and leaving comments. And we would hear stories about these people in Russia that could do, insane numbers, like, 200 snatches with the 32 kilo. Now, at that time, in US, if you could do, I was one of a handful of guys that could do like 30 or 35 snatches per hand with a 32. And if you could do like 30 snatches with the 32, you were a mutant, as Pavel language, right? Oh, you're a mutant. Little did we know that there was guys, doing 3 times that, no problem. And so that was sort of the early. I met Valery Fedorenko in, I guess, 2004. I went up to San Francisco. There's a guy named, a lot of people, they always give Pavel credit as being the first guy to start, and him along with John Duquesne, who's the owner of Dragon Door Publications. Those guys definitely were the originators of the trend. John Duquesne's marketing, Pavel's personality and persona. Collectively, they created the buzz, got the word out. John was really a master, still is, it's a master copywriter. So he was using a very effective, marketing tactic combined with internet and getting the word out. So those guys deserve a lot of credit. If it wasn't for them, I don't think any of us would have ever heard about kettlebells, or maybe we'd just be hearing about it now. But there was people before Pavel here. It's just that no one, if a tree falls in the forest and doesn't make, no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound type of thing. Valerie Fedorenko was here doing kettlebells like in the late 90s. But in 2004, I went up to San Francisco to this guy named Dmitry Sateev. Some of you might have met him or know of him. I think he's still around somewhere, but Dmitry is another, I think, Ukrainian guy. He had a gym in downtown San Diego, and he had this group of Russian champions coming over to do a demonstration. And so I went up there, and there was only like two of us, or maybe three of us there, like to participate or to observe. And there was these 5 Russian champions, and Valery Fedorenko was one of them. He was already living here in US, so that was my first meeting with him. Ivan Denisov was there. He was really young at that time. And there was 3 other guys. I don't remember their names, and they did an incredible display of, hundreds of reps of the lifts. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I couldn't do anything like that. Still can't. But, that was my first exposure. Later, let's see, Fedorenko did some presentation at this event in Las Vegas. We had this kettlebell convention in Vegas in 2004. Fedorenko did a talk on kettlebell sport. And then he and I stayed in contact, invited him out to San Diego also 2004 to do a kettlebell sport seminar. So that was probably my first actual formal training or exposure to kettlebell sport through the Fedorenko method. And then subsequently to that, so 2005, I was still with RKC as one of their senior instructors. And the way that was laid out, it was always a 3-day event. On the second day, Saturday, we would always have a group dinner in the evening. So there was a group of us sitting at the table. One of them was like, hey, we should go to Russia. And there's a kettlebell championship in November. And this was, I think, like September. And I was like, I'll go, and so there was 8 of us. We all like, yeah, we're going to go. One of the guys was a pilot, this guy, Matt. His friend, also Matt, was worked for the airlines, and he was fluent in Russian. And he had like 3 or 4 Russian wives, not at the same time, but he had married like 3 or 4 different times to Russians. So he was going over there frequently, working for the airlines. They fly for free, basically. So he was always going to Russia. He was fluent in the language. So we're like, we have our interpreter here. And so we went over there, November 2005. And it was Marty Farrell was part of that group. Those of you that, Marty's definitely a legend in the American kettlebell sport scene. He was, I think, the second guy to ever earn Master of Sport, second American man to ever earn Master of Sport. And so it was Marty and I. Marty was my roommate, and I have some really fun stories that are not kettlebell related about that trip there. But we went over to Moscow, and I remember sitting there And the first night, the night before the competition started, we were staying in this where the gym was. It was not a hostel, but it wasn't a hotel. It was like just rooms above where the athletes would stay. So we were in this and we're like, what are we going to do? Let's go down to the gym. We went down to the gym. There was these guys working out, and there was Anasenko, Anton Anasenko. I didn't know who he was at that time, but he was doing like hyperextension machine with a barbell behind his neck, really high reps, and he gets off and we shake hands. I don't speak a lick of Russian. He doesn't speak a lick of English, but he's like, champion. Like that. I was like, okay, this guy's humble, so and I was like, oh, nice to meet you, champion. And that was pretty much it.
That sounds very Russian.
Yeah. The next day the competition starts, right? So we have our Team USA there. And my set.
So how many people were at the competition, do you think?
I think there was, I would guess around 130 to 150, mostly there wasn't too many, like there was no Australia or England. I think US was one of the few Western countries, but there was, a lot of former Soviet, Lithuania and Belarus and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Tatarstan and Georgia. All those guys had teams. So there was probably 15 or 20 countries. Yeah, I would estimate 130 or more athletes. Ivan Denisov, that was the year that he hit 175 jerks. So at that time, he had broken the record. Prior to that, it was 170 that the Russian bear, Sergei Mishin, had 170. Denisov hit 175. And that record stood for until just a couple of years ago, I think. And Ivan Markov, I think, I got 176, right? So
I think that he just hit 180.
Yeah, or 182.
He hit 180 something
Yeah,
recently.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Denisov is just like he's just such a huge person.
Yes. Amazing. Yeah, I mean, super powerful guy. And yeah, so on my set now, that earlier that year, which I should have mentioned, we had a North American kettlebell. I think it was called the NAKF, North American Kettlebell. And we had the NAKF championship in Virginia. In that year, I did 60 jerks with the 32. And I think I only did like 28 or 30 snatches. So I think I missed CMS by like 2 reps. So my expectation was like 60 plus. That had been my best in competition up to that point. And so when I went to Moscow, when it was my set, I was competing. Not Denisov, but Anasenko was on my left, and then I don't remember who was on my right, but he did 155 jerks, and I ended up doing 45. I was at 6 reps a minute, and I put it down, like at the 7.5 or 8 minute mark, and I was like, oh man, super depressed, and I felt like I did so shitty. Sat down, watched the rest of the set, and I was just like thinking to myself, man, what am I doing here? I don't belong here, and just feeling like, feeling bad and feeling like, man, I made an embarrassment of myself, and these guys are doing 4 times or 3 times the reps, and and I was just like feeling bad for a half hour, and I'm like, come on, get over it. And I started thinking, I was like, how's this happen? Like, what do these guys know that I don't know? Like, is he 3 times stronger, 3 times more fit? Like, I didn't believe that, because going into it, now I didn't think of that at the time, but when I look back going into it, I was like cocky. I was like, oh yeah, I'm Steve Cotter, man. I'm one of the mutants. I'm like, one of the top guys in US and senior RKC and all this, And I was like, nope, there's no guy in my weight division that's going to be 3 times stronger than me. I don't believe that, right? And I started just thinking, I was like, okay, well, what do they know that I don't know? And I realized, well, yeah, the conditioning's a part of it, the strength's a part of it, but the technique and the skill, that's what I'm missing. There was no avenue for that yet. We didn't have, the Russian explosion didn't occur yet, where so there was really only Valery Fedorenko in the US at that time that had, the experience and the knowledge. And he was doing some coaching, but he never really brought it wide scale. I think just the language barrier. Mostly he got into the distribution of the first really competition kettlebells with his World Kettlebell Club, American Kettlebell Club, World Kettlebell Club. But his seminars never really were widespread. And the people that did Fedorenko's method, I think Marty was one of the few guys that ever really took it and became master of sport. And I think his method didn't really transmit to a lot of people because his method was based more on a competition style. Where it was like, okay, your training today is, you're going to do 1 set, 8-minute snatch. Tomorrow it's going to be, 1 set, 7-minute jerk. And it was just always like warm up, 1 money set. Then you do the same thing every day. And it's like, oh, what's today? Oh, I get 8 minutes of jerk. Oh, what's tomorrow? Oh, 10 minutes of jerk, and it's like the interval training method kind of didn't come until like Rudeneff and Dennis. Obviously Dennis made it really popular, but Fedorenko was more, I guess, of an older generation where it was more of a competition set. And so where are we at here with this? Yeah, so the Russian experience was humbling, illuminating. I remember coming back, and the next year went to Latvia. That was 2006. So we went again, and it was the Riga championships. And again, I didn't do real great, but my training, I wasn't really training at a high level. I was like periodic and had no concept of the importance of the consistency. And a training program was like just training myself, right? And
it was really the same like when I first started training, we were doing just a lot of single set large sets. And when I switched over and started training with Arseni, my volume, the amount of volume that he was wanting me to do in a training session was so much larger than what I had been doing. And really, that was what was kind of keeping me from progressing forward. And you just don't know what you don't know, right? And so I'm sure it was the same for you when you're going to these competitions, and a lot of these Russians are, training 3 to 4 days a week on kettlebell, and they're doing, 13 to, 15 to 20,000 kilograms of weight during a session. And you're over here like, shit, I only did like 6,000,
Yeah, just the level of volume. And it's a professional sport, and that's or at least a high level amateur sport if you're doing it as an amateur. But it's not like any sport. If you're going to get good, you have to do the thing and you have to do it all the time. You have to do it consistently. And so there was not that understanding at that time. I remember, right before going to Riga in 2006, I was, still working with Pavel and the RKC. Strong First didn't exist at that time. Strong First came on, some years later. But, Paul was like, oh, Steve, how you feeling, getting ready to go to Latvia. And I said, oh, I feel good and I'll do my best. And I asked him, I said, hey, Pablo, do you ever think about maybe Dragon Door bringing in, competition kettlebells? Because I think there's more people starting to, be interested in that. And he's like, oh, no, I'm not. We're gonna focus on what we do, and that's kind of Fedorenko's. It's Fedorenko's thing. So if he wants to bring them in, that's fine. And about a couple of years after that is when Fedorenko started his American Kettlebell Club and started, introducing we call the VF kettlebell now, right? The first competition kettlebell really that people could buy here in the US. And so that was my early exposure. 2012, the first year was 2011. I didn't go, but I went the second year. Ken Blackburn and I went out to St. Petersburg for the what was Alexander Kossin, right? He had organized these. What was the organization called? That drawing a blank, but he started getting together these Russian champions. And it was Rudnev was the head coach, and Rachinsky and Dennis. I remember meeting Dennis there for the first time. He was, still young and very, very active with the national team at that time.
Was it WASC? It's like WASC or something. Was that it?
WA World Kettlebell Sport Federation.
Yeah, WA. Yeah, that one. Yep.
Yes, that's it. And it was a lot of guys there. The Tikhonov, he was the team doctor. The Soviet team doctor was there explaining, and his English was not too bad. Well, he spoke some English, I would say. He was explaining about the testing procedures of the athletes and how they found out, kind of came to what we would now call the modern methodology of kettlebell sport, which is usually based upon interval training. So Dennis was probably that generation when he was coming up. That was one of the first generations that were using this type of training methodology where it's okay, we're going to do short sets and repeats with a quick recovery, versus prior to that, there was more typically a competition style where you're doing one long set. So Tikhonov was explaining how the athletes, they would put on the EKG and measure their electrical activity of the heart at rest, and then under training, and the respiration, measuring the respirometer, and these different measurements and different protocols, and then recording, and ultimately finding out what is the best methodology for producing results. And so that was fascinating. Sergei Mishin was there. Sergei Merkulin was there. That was a great trip. A lot of people that have been around in US, in North America at that time, were over there. Ken Blackburn, Sean Mosen, Jeff Martone, Lorna Kleidman was there. I'm probably missing some people, but it was, I think, Kevin and Nakona Jadri were there. Jason Dolby, of course, John Buckley, Nazo. So it was a lot of fun being over there with those guys. And that was myself, and I think most of us, our first exposure to this is modern kettlebell methodology, where they're revealing the secrets, and ultimately I think Alexander Kossin was the guy that figured out, hey, there's Americans and Australians and Europeans and Canadians, and people in the West, they will pay money to learn this stuff. And prior to that, those guys weren't really making money with kettlebells. They were all pretty much military guys, and their job was, they were athletes. So their job was okay, you're going to lift kettlebells and you're going to compete. but they were just getting their normal salary from the military. They weren't like making money doing seminars and things like that. So I think
So I
Alexander,
don't know that a lot of people know that on if you're in the Russian military, it is a requirement that like that's like they do kettlebell. So they have like the military snatch competition, and so it is a requirement that you do kettlebell. And if you are really good at kettlebell, they like keep you in the army, and that's kind of how they pay you, and that's your sport, like kind of for the Olympics. But I mean, it's not the Olympics, so and that's what they do. So pretty much all those guys that are top level Russian kettlebell lifters are all in the military in some fashion or some form. So I think a lot of people don't think about that. Like they're paid to go and lift and train, and that, I mean, they also do stuff in the military, but like they have a big focus in that. The rest of us are just over here like doing
it's a hobby. Yeah. So definitely sponsored in that sense, where that's your job, and that's a cool job if you have the aptitude for it, and so that was my my early exposure. I feel like subsequently recap, definitely my first exposure kettlebell. It had nothing to do with kettlebell sport, and honestly, I do feel, well, I know I learned a lot of bad habits. We can always look back in 2020 vision, but I'm not saying it's a negative, and I'm grateful for the experience, but I would say that if I was doing it all over again, I would much rather have had the exposure from the beginning of the more precise methodology that we now have access to, that we didn't have access to previously, and it was like, oh, and the focus was different, but it is what it is, and we have to just try to adapt and be open-minded. And one thing, I can say that I've always been open-minded and willing to learn. And, if somebody can show me a better way, and how do we measure better? Well, in kettlebells, it's pretty straightforward. You can do more, right? More is better. If I do 10 reps and you do 20, yours is better. Like that's by any measure, right? And some people still have a hard time grasping that concept. It's like, oh yeah, but I use more effort in my 5 reps, right, than you did in your 120 reps. Like your 120 reps, you were just super relaxed, and I was like tight. So mine was,
well, if you think about it, it's really very much like running. Nobody's like, okay, you went out and ran a mile. Well, it really better if I was able to run 10 miles, 5 miles. But if your technique and your form and your breathing cadence and all these little things don't line up for your running, you're not going to be great at it. Now, some people are just more predispositioned to running, just like I think some people are more predisposition for kettlebell. You just got just like the perfect arm figuration where your arms dip in slightly so you can hold the bell overhead forever. So I mean, there are some little things that make some people better than others, but in just like running, just like kettlebell, like that technique portion really means that, and I feel like it's what makes it such a great sport is like the volume and the number of lifts that you're doing. And because it is like very hip dominant, leg dominant, and cardiovascular base, it really transitions over to a lot of other sports where you can do kettlebell and also see improvements in these other athletic abilities that you do. When I first started doing kettlebell, I was playing softball. And so I was out of high school and all that at that point. But what I really noticed is that we were just doing, like when I first started, just doing hard style swings and just presses and, that kind of stuff. And but even when I was doing those things, what I really noticed is that my hip drive and hip power just went way up. And I went from, hitting maybe a home run or really, long hits, maybe a couple times a season to like 1 or 2 a game. Like it like explosively went up like a lot. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what am I doing different? Because at that point I wasn't like practicing softball anymore. I was just like going out and playing in rec leagues. And and the only real change was the addition of kettlebell. And so that really got me interested in like doing more of it, figuring out what else you can do with it. And I think this is about the time that we ended up meeting, which was like, see, my son was born in 2013, so it had been like 2011, 2012, sometime in that time frame. I came down for a seminar in Novi, and I did a seminar there. And I remember because Ken would not certify me in the level 1 certification for doing long cycle or jerk because he didn't think my jerk was good enough. And so he was like, go home, work on it, come back, and then, you know, like send me a video and then I'll see about certifying you. So I think it was 2 or 3 months later. I think it was at that, I think Arseni was also there at that certification.
Yeah, I remember Arseni working with you on I think it was the jerk or the long cycle. Yeah, I remember that. Actually, we you know, with IKFF, we actually had invited Arseni, and I'm trying to remember how I connected with him, but we brought him to Novi as like a guest instructor, and he did that seminar on kettlebell sport. You know, his method was quite modern and, you know, different than, you know, as opposed to like Fedorenko. And then he and I went to South Africa, like later that year, or I think the next year we went to South Africa and did some seminars, you know, there. So that was really cool. Yeah, you know, and fast forwarding a few years, I mean, you know, definitely with the history, your name is super prominent as well, Kim. Not blowing smoke because you're the hostess, but that's, you know, like you were the person that said, hey, oh, really? Women can't? Okay, well, let me show you. And you were the one that were showing not just women, men, but, you know, men, our egos are a little fragile. Like, we don't want to publicly usually admit, oh, yeah, that woman's stronger than me or more fit than me. But, like, you've inspired a lot of women, especially, to say that we can be strong. We are strong. And it's like we can do everything. And, you know, you were the first one to start lifting double long cycling competition, the first one to do 24s. And, you know, so that's a huge part of the history. And I know Arseni was super, and still is, I think, super encouraging in that, in guiding you and, you know, pushing you probably to doing that. So that's a huge part of the, you know, that's a huge part of the history that's still being written, you know. And I know a lot of women admire you. Luciana admires you a lot, you know, for what you've done and what you're still doing. So that's definitely a big part of the history, you know. And trying to think,
Well, just know that you guys are very much part of why that even came around, because had I not gone to that seminar, had I not followed up and gone to, there was a competition in Novi as well. I think about 4 months after I did that seminar, I came and did snatch, and I only did like, I was so disappointed. I only did like, which I mean, it at the time, like if I think back about it now, I'm like, it's not bad. But like when I was at the seminar, I think I did like 145 snatches. Because at the end of all the work we did, we came back and like people did like a 10-minute set, you know, just to see what it was like in the seminar. And I think I did like 146 or 140 reps during the seminar with a 12 kilogram snatch. So then I went to competition and I did like basically the exact same thing 4 months later. So I was like super like sad about it. And I'm like, oh, I suck. Like, why am I not getting any better? And, you know, you just have to think about like, this is an endurance exercise, and it really does take your body some time to like kind of flip the switch each time you're taking a step up. But when I went, you know, through all those competitions, like everybody was always so nice and so welcoming. Like, I think that's a really interesting thing about kettlebell sport. You know, I've been involved in a lot of sports over the years, and I do think that the kettlebell community is always like super welcoming, no matter where you go. Like even when I go to world competitions where you think that people are going to be more standoffish because they're like your competition, people are always super inviting. So, I mean, I don't know how much people know about the progress you were kind of talking about, you know, women moving into doing kettlebell. You know, when I first got involved in the sport, women only did single bell lifts. So, and in the US, there was, well, I wouldn't say only in the US, but especially in Russia, there was not like one arm long cycle. Like that kind of started in the US and some other countries where women are like, hey, we want to do more than just one arm snatch. So one arm long cycle developed. And I don't know how many years, because I came in later, how many years one arm long cycle had been going by the time I started. Do you know? Because I started about, we'll say that's 2012.
NAKF, if I'm not mistaken, I do remember like NAKF started having one arm long cycle events. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it started in, you know, US, and, you know, it could have been some other Western countries, but it was definitely in the Western countries where, you know, later the IUKL or other organizations started saying, okay, we're going to include it because the train already left the station at that point. So, yeah, but nobody was doing doubles, right? And I do remember early on it was, oh, women can't because the reason was because it was going to harm the, you know, harm the breast tissues, right? For the kettlebells to drop. And it's like guys always trying to make decisions about what's best for a woman's body, which is pretty ridiculous. But there was a lot of that. But then, you know, yourself and others just like, we're going to do it anyway. And after a few years of that, then it's like now, you know, nobody's trying to stop it.
I actually got messages from, there was from some Russians and then from some other, it was mostly in the Russian community that were like, what about your breasts? What about your organs? And I'm like, do you not have breast tissue? Do you not have organs? Like, and, but they were, it was a very serious comment. Like, you know, aren't you worried about what you're going to injure? And when I first went to Arseni, that I wanted him to coach me, I was trying to do 24 kilogram one arm long cycle. And he was like, hey, you know, yeah, I'll coach you. But if I'm going to coach you, then we're going to do double bells. And I was also, I'm already new to the sport at this point, and I'm like, they don't even offer double bell. Where am I going to lift to even do this? I'm training. Where would I even do it at? And he's like, we'll figure it out. You know, like there'll be a place. And so I started out like really just 16 kilogram bells. I think I could only do like 30 reps in 5 minutes. Like when I first started, I don't even think I finished the 5 minutes. And so that kind of progressed. And then Aaron, what's his name? He had the Texas kettlebell.
Yeah.
Yes. So he was hosting a competition, and I basically just messaged him and said, hey, you don't offer double bells, but could I come down and just stand up on the platform and do 24 kilogram double long cycle, and you just count my reps? Like, just let me. And he's like, sure. He's like, yeah, come down. I'll try and find somebody to put up there with you so you're not standing by yourself. And so that is really kind of where it started. And I got so much backlash after that competition. Like people just like really upset that I was like doing a double bell lift, which was really surprising to me because one, I'm new to the sport anyway. But that really made me be like, well, fuck you, I'm going to do it then for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's awesome.
So, and then I think really,
yeah.
I don't know if it was IKF, but I feel like IKF have started really hosting the first double bell lifts.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of talk about IKF and like where that kind of started and with you and Ken and
So you know, so as far as like IKFF, when I started, it was not for the purpose of kettlebell sport. You know, it never has been really. That was just a, you know, it was basically when I was with, you know, RKC, and you know, then I wasn't anymore. It was like we had a a major difference of opinion. I started doing, DVDs, and, is like, from my point of view, glass ceiling, like, I want you to be successful if you're under me, but if you start showing too much potential, like, no, we can't, so, I was like, okay, well, I'm on my own now. And I was like, what am I going to do? I thought I was going to be with RKC for the rest of the time, and now I'm not, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do here. And I started thinking, it's like, well, Pavel's like got a really big following at this point, and but everything was always in Minnesota. It's like Pavel was always St. Paul, Minnesota. You want to be certified, you live in, Hong Kong, you got to fly over to St. Paul, Minnesota. And, and I remember talking to him years prior. I was like, Pavel, do you ever think about bringing this overseas? He was like, no, if they want to learn, they can come here. They can come here to learn. I was like, oh, okay. And so then I'm like, well, I'm not going to try to compete head to head with Pavel because his market is way bigger. I'm going to go everywhere where he's not. So then I started going around the world, and 2007, really 2006, but as far as for the full year, 2007 is when I started doing just a lot of seminars. IKFF hadn't started yet. But I was, I had some online clients. One guy in Barcelona was like, I want you to come to Barcelona. And I had people that I had met through RKC, and, I'm in London, come to London. So I was starting to do that. And it was like every time I would go somewhere, there'd be somebody, especially in Europe, because in Europe, it's really easy to travel around. There would be somebody from somewhere else saying, oh, I loved your seminar. I want to bring you to my gym over here. Right. So I was like bouncing around. And finally, like late 2007, I went to do some seminars in Singapore. And there was a guy there, this guy Peter, saying, oh, I have contacts. I used to live in Hong Kong. I'm going to give you a contact for a guy that owns a gym in Hong Kong. So he gives me that contact. And I was living in Bangkok for a few years, and there's a woman in Bangkok. I'm going to give you her contact. So I contacted these people. And the guy in Hong Kong, Kevin Rushton, I was like, hey, I'm Steve Cotter. I got your contact details from Peter, and I did. And so sorry.
There we go. Okay, can you hear me again?
All right.
Okay, so we were talking about Hong Kong.
I was like, yeah, I thought you might be interested in some kettlebell seminars. He's like, well, yeah, that sounds really interesting. But here in Hong Kong, now this is like late 2007. He's like, here in Hong Kong, everybody, all the trainers are looking for certifications. Do you have a certification? Well, I didn't have one. I was like, yes, I do. Right. And so it's like, if you build it, they will come type of thing. And, so then he's like, okay, let's schedule, how about January? This was like a couple of months coming up. I was like, in January, can you come to Hong Kong? I was like, yeah. And, we want you to do kettlebell certifications. So I was like, okay. So that day, I went to the city, I did my business setup, IKFF, and I was like, I need a right hand, I need a right hand. I need somebody to kind of work with me on this. And So it was like, of all the people I had met up to that journey, Ken Blackburn was the guy that came to mind. And I was, Ken, I had met him probably 4 or 5 times. He'd come out, I guess the first time I was in Novi, or not in Novi, but like near there, like Fenton. I was in Fenton and Michigan. And I did a seminar at some jujitsu school, and Ken was one of the students that came there. So that was the first time. And then after that, he's like, "Oh yeah, I loved your seminar. I want to get you to come out here again." I came out like a year later and did a seminar. And then Ken came like to the RKC, and I was his instructor there. And then after that, he invited me out to Michigan again, and like, let's do a seminar together. And then we did another seminar. So it was like 5 different times we had been together at that time. And so I called Ken up. I was like, "Hey Ken, I want to start this kettlebell certification, and I want you to help me with it. I want you to be my right hand." And he's like, "Oh yeah." And so that's how we started. So I went to Hong Kong January 2008. That was the first ever IKFF certification. And then from there, it just took off, like wildfires. Like the next month, Ken came with me. We did this big event in Chicago, and then it just went on and on. And for the first couple of years, Ken was flying around the world with me. We were going to all places, Scotland, England, and a lot of different places. And so I'm not sure what year. It was probably 1 or 2 years in. Ken's like, "Well, what about if we start doing kettlebell sport competitions?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm open for the idea, but I'm not really, I don't have the time, and I don't have the experience to really organize a kettlebell sport." He's like, "Well, I can do it," because previous to that, he took over the NAKF for a couple of years. They'd gone through a few different, leaders, and nobody wanted to do it. So Ken ended up doing that, and he was doing a really good job. And Ken's just really great at putting together these events. And I know you competed in at least one or several of his, IKFF events. So I was like, "All right, Ken, you're going to be in charge of the IKFF competitions." All right. So he started doing the national competitions in Novi every like November in Michigan for a good at least 4 or 5 years. He'd do like a spring invitational as well. So he's doing like twice a year out there, and then also doing some other IKFF events like in Seattle and New Hampshire and other places. And that was how I was never super involved with that. I was just like, "Well, you can use the IKFF name, and you're gonna take care of that." And Ken was focusing on the kettlebell sport competitions, and I was focusing mostly on the fitness certifications. And that's how it all came. And that went on until probably 2015 or 16, I think. And then at that point, again, we went over to St. Petersburg in 2012, met all those amazing guys. And then I think Dennis came, I'm not sure when he moved over here, but a few years after that, 14, 15. I know John Wild Buckley and Jason Dolby, he was pretty
Trying to think when their first, they had a really big competition in California. It had to have been, I'm trying to think about the time frame.
the North.
Maybe 2016, 2017.
Yeah, I competed at that one. That one like Denisov, and he was there. Denisov was there, and Arseny was there, and Rachinsky came.
I don't remember. I think that was the really big one. There was like 200 competitors, and they managed to get I think he had 12 platforms. It was huge. And so they had 12 platforms, and they had a woman on each one of those platforms doing 24 kilograms. It was like super amazing, because at that point, like that was really like the first competition that had like women competing against each other at a professional way, with 2 bells, which was just crazy awesome to see. What do you feel like, I think at that point, that 2017, 2018 period, like I feel like kettlebell especially in the United States, but probably really across the world, I feel like that was really like, we were at like a really high point during that period. There was a lot of people training. There was I felt like a lot of interest in the sport. What do you feel like needs to happen? What do you feel like that has changed we're kind of on a downslope, I feel like, for kettlebell sport. What do you feel like needs to be different or needs to change in order for us to bring more people to the sport, to make it more inclusive?
Yeah. So a couple things. On one level, I think there's enough awareness about it in the general, but within again, it's like a subgroup of a group. So it's like the kettlebell community is bigger than it used to be, right? As far as people using kettlebells. And, I think part of that is social media. Kettlebell sport doesn't translate on social media in the way that kettlebell flows, as people call it, does, because it's not as artistic to the untrained eye. Like, it's beautiful if you have an idea of what it takes to put up that type of high level performance. But for someone that doesn't have that understanding, it's like, oh, it's just the same movement over and over, right? It's like watching someone run. If you're a runner, you're looking at the stride and the foot placement and the pacing. But if you're not a runner, it's like, oh, this is boring. And I think that is where the kettlebell sport has hit sort of a plateau. And the other part of it is those that do appreciate and are aware, they realize, oh, yeah, it sounds cool to have master of sport behind your name, but I'm not willing to suffer to that degree to put in the work, because it just doesn't come because you want it to come. Like, the effort has to match the desire, right? Or the desire has to really be greater than just a wish. And, so it's super hard for one thing, and so that already eliminates 99% of the population that are willing to suffer that much to get to that high level.
Only the crazy people, right? Only.
Yeah, also crazy, And I think the other thing on the positive side, I think like Moses Dunca with the youth kettlebells, that's definitely the way forward. Where, yes, let's focus on getting younger, the youth in it. I mean, jiu-jitsu is probably a great sport to look at, because if you see what's happening to jiu-jitsu has really evolved quite, because you have the first generation now of 20-year-olds that have been doing jiu-jitsu for like 18 years. And so by the time they're like 14-year-old blue belts, they already have black belt level skill, because they grew up in their diapers, they were on the mats because their dads or their mom was a black belt. And so you have this first generation in jiu-jitsu where they've been doing it their whole lives. And we don't really see that in kettlebell yet, but I think that that's the next level, where you have those of us that are in kettlebells and love kettlebells and kettlebell sport. As we have my kids are a little older. My youngest is 20 and he loves the kettlebells, but he's doing jiu-jitsu and a lot of other things. But when we have that first generation of kids being exposed, Moses just kind of went to them, say, we're going to provide the gear that fits your body. And that's really smart and really visionary to do that. They say, I met this really wealthy guy in the Philippines, and had lunch with him, and he was really smart guy about business. And he was saying that, implementation, right? Implementation really comes down to money. He's like, because there's a lot of great ideas, but people don't have the money. You never find out about it. And then you can have really pretty basic or even shitty ideas, but if you put enough money into it, it's going to get out there and make it to the market. So that's always the challenge, is like, most of the people at the grassroots level, we're just regular people hustling to make a living, take care of our families. There's not a lot of extra time and a lot of extra money to pour into creating the platform, so that's, but all challenges can be overcome, right? All challenges can be overcome. So, I think the way forward, as far as if we were to put our brains together, we could figure out, look, there needs to be youth programs, but in order for there to be youth programs, there has to be well-trained and trusted coaches, right? Because you need the coaches to run the programs to teach the kids. And now once the kids are going, they grow up, and now that's how it's like they've done with other sports. So, it's a couple different phases there, but definitely the cooperation is a big part of that. And I see like what's happening in Europe with Ole Ilika with the WAK?
It's WKSF.
WKSF. I think that's in the right direction, because Ola has, I think, more of the global mindset, where he's not just thinking about, I'm Ukrainian, or we're just going to, the Russians have to be in charge. He's thinking about, well, I want everybody involved. And I think that's a progression over some of the previous organizations that were very sort of centralized, in kind of the Soviet states, and didn't want to be as inclusive as far as who had a say in the direction. Ola, I think, from my perspective, and having, I used to train under Ola when I was staying in Italy a lot. I did some trainings with him. I think he's, a really great leader in that regard. So it's moving in that direction. You have people over here like Dennis. Dennis is American. Like he has all the knowledge from the Russian system, but he has this global mindset as far as like, let's get everybody involved. And that's required, and
Yeah, I
humans.
think like, for a long time, I think we had an issue with access, right? Trying to get access to the information for how you train, how you do, and there is really not a lot online talking about how you're supposed to train to get better at this, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I created the Almanac page, was because I wanted people to have access to be able to find that information. It started out just like finding competitions, because it's like all over the place. Like, where do you find to go do a competition? Because each organization has their own listing, and it's just so hard to find stuff. And then that kind of evolved to like trying to get more information out there about like what kettlebell sport is, how you train, how you advance, how can you find a coach if you want to coach. So I think the access part is the first thing. Like, how do we get more information out to people so that they can start on their own? And then when they get to a point, they're like, oh, I'm not going anywhere. I need somebody to help me get farther. Once they get that interest, because if you don't have that interest, you're not just going to jump right into like going and finding a coach. I mean, I didn't. That wasn't my first step, is like to go find a coach. You kind of got the bug, and then you want to coach. Then you want to get better. And then on top of that, it's like integration and the organizations working together. We have a very small group of athletes, which is like that across most of the nations that are doing kettlebell. And I think we try and like hold like power over those individual tiny group of people to be like, oh, this is my group. But there's so many, like when I go to competitions, a lot of times I'm going to wherever I want to go, that I like the location. I'm going because it's fun. So I'm going to pick locations that I want to go visit because nobody's paying me. I don't have a sponsor. It's all out of my own pocket. And to really, try and integrate and utilize that to all work together. So, I'm with the AKLU now, and that's what we've been trying to really reach out to different organizations to be like, hey, look, we have this pool of athletes that want to compete at some world competition. Like, let's make it more accessible. So they could go to your nationals, they could go to our nationals, they could go to another person's nationals, and we can create a large pool of lifters that all want to go to worlds. And then, they can choose what world competition that they want to go to. Maybe that's multiple ones. Maybe it's not, because every competition you fly to or you pay to go compete at, it's like $100 plus your travel or whatever. And like, I can't afford to go to multiple nationals, because nobody's paying for me to get there. It's not like that organization is like, hey, come compete at our competition and we'll pay you to be here. Sometimes, but most of the time, no. And so to really utilize that, so
Yeah, you'd have to like, okay, we wanted you to do a seminar, then that can offset, or that's kind of the only way for higher level lifters like yourself, that could maybe cover the expenses, but that's not most people. And also that's not most events, because it's just people don't necessarily want to stay an extra day or go to the seminar the day after, so yeah, it is a challenge, and I completely understand it. I think a really great model is this year with Dana Zorns was kind of called the straw that stirred the drink. He did that event, and it was, I think AUKL supported it definitely. And he kind of brought together, pro kettlebells. He brought Kettlebell World League or IKO with Dennis, myself with IKFF, and he, that was a model that I think can be a successful model. And what I've noticed in all the different places around the world that I have been, bodybuilding is really the big. Bodybuilding is what people are interested in, whether they want to call it bodybuilding or not. And even if we look at like the kettlebell users on social media, most of them, most of the guys feel like, oh, I have to take off my shirt in every video. It's like, well, it's not up to me, but it's just an innate human thing. Is like people associate kettlebells with fitness, and they associate fitness with bodybuilding at some level, because it's like some aesthetic. It's like, oh, I want to look good naked, or I want to look good in a bikini, or I want people to find me attractive, or, and that's human nature. And it's not for me. Like I'll be 54 next week. So it's like, we go through phases in life. What you care about when you're 20 you shouldn't still be caring about all those same things 30 years later. But, I understand the process. I understand what it's like. I can't speak for women, personally, but, as a guy, I can understand the mindset, is what, and I imagine with a lot of women also, this pressure of society is like, oh, I have to look a certain way, so there needs to be more education, because what I think is like, and Luciana's taught me a lot about this, is like, the body inclusivity. A lot of people misunderstand it. They think, oh, obesity is like, look, I don't care if you're fat, you're skinny, you're tall, you're short. That doesn't matter. Like everybody, it's not for me to say, oh, you need to lose weight, right? Because you have a certain, you look a certain way. Like you can be big and you can be strong. You can be big and you can be fit. You can be skinny and you can also be thin and unhealthy, right? So it's like we need to move away from the idea that fitness equals a certain aesthetic, because it doesn't, and genetics comes into play, whether you want to admit it or not. It's like who your parents were is going to have a big imprint on your body and how you process. And, so there's a lot to it, but it's like bodybuilding, for whatever reasons, is still the draw. And you especially go to Asian countries, and you go to like Japan, bodybuilding is huge, and kettlebells is very, very small, and the Japanese they're great athletes. They're great in martial arts. They're great at all the sports that, baseball and ice skating and all these things. So for sure they could be great at kettlebells if they, but bodybuilding is what's popular. So, what Dana did at that event in Atlantic City, was last October, is he basically organized with the Mr. America competition, and in Mr. America, it's kind of like a smaller version of the Arnold. It starts as a bodybuilding competition, and then it grows over time into a sports festival where you start having other sports. And so I think that is a very successful model where kettlebell organizations coordinate with bodybuilding shows, because the bodybuilding shows always draws people. There's a certain population, and there's a population of people that have money and want to spend money. And for whatever reason, those guys like sitting there and watching guys pose on the stage. I don't know the attraction, but hey, there's an audience for it. And, if you can synchronize with the bodybuilding competition and the sport, and it's like, hey, we want to do a kettlebell event at your bodybuilding show, that's definitely a formula that has shown to be successful. And I've seen it time and time again at different venues, and that's where you have these big, like Gold's Gym and Mr. America, like they have resources. So for them, for like a kettlebell organization, $10,000, we can do a lot of money with that, as far as and for these other organizations, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars just like for a booth, So there's definitely money out there. It's just the grassroots kettlebell people are just hardworking, regular people, that are like taking care of our families and just trying to live a regular, clean lifestyle. And, we're not venture capitalists in that regard. So there needs to be a way to kind of bring those audiences together, where you have kind of the bodybuilding, which appeals to the aesthetics. You have the fitness, which is kind of a pretty broad, and then you have kind of the niche, which is the kettlebell is the niche. What you said is true. The kettlebell sport seemed to reach a plateau, but kettlebells in general has grown, and it grew during the COVID, especially because now everyone's on lockdown for a couple of years. Can't go, a lot of public places are closed. And so it's like, I got to train at home. Well, the kettlebell is the perfect solution for that, and a lot of people got into it. And so now there's the challenge of having good information, because it's like, there's a lot of kettlebell influencers that have, several hundred thousands of followers that they purchased or whatever. But they're super famous kettlebell influencer, and that, they're not inserting their hand correctly in the bell. So it's like that basic information needs to be, I don't know how to do that myself,
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is true, like really the ability for us to get out there so we're seen, because if people don't see it, they don't know what it is. And you're right, like when we went to, is that Mr. America? Yes, Mr. America. So that's where that kettlebell competition was. And there was a ton of people that were coming over and kind of watching and like, what are y'all doing? Like, what's happening here? To get interested in it. And I think also starting to sell it or market it as, this is cardio. This is fitness lifting, right? So what's the benefit? Yeah. Even if you're not going to compete, like you're burning a ton of calories while you're lifting. You're also under load. So, maintaining bone mass, muscle mass, all play into even doing competition style lifting that's at intervals. Which most people don't really think about when they, I think, are thinking about kettlebells per se. I think also because with hardstyle, there's very short amounts of lifting that you're doing. And so it's not really what you would think is like a cardiovascular type of lift where, you're doing it for an extended period of time, even though it's intervals. I just posted a video, or not video, but a picture of my spine because I just had a bone density scan done. And, because kettlebell lifting is predominantly what I do for probably, 60% of my lifting. I do lift weights, I do some cardio, but most of my cardio is done through kettlebell lifting. But the benefits from increased bone density, and being able to maintain muscle mass over time, I think is, a huge selling point, which most people, we don't market that, right? We're just trying to get out there to get people to the sport, but what gets them to the sport to begin with is coming in for the fitness aspect. And you have to make that fitness aspect doable. So they want to keep doing it. And then after they've been doing it for a while, they're like, man, I really love doing this. And then hopefully they want to take it to the next level and go on and do competitions. But I think that's where we kind of miss the mark as coaches and people who run, kettlebell sport clubs or gyms, is that when people first come in, it's really scary because, and you're right, everybody looks different, right? For what you think an athlete is supposed to look like. Most people are going to look and be like, oh, that ripped guy over there, that's the guy, that's the full on fitness, and every athlete is different depending on their type of sport. But when they come in, the girls that I train are a wide array of body types. And guys will come in and lift and they're like, what the hell? Like, y'all are doing all this weight for all this time. And we don't really probably step them in well enough so they feel comfortable, because they're so far behind already when they're starting. And it's just like when you come in and do jujitsu for the first time, when people come in, I'm like, hey, look, it's going to take you about 4 months before you are rolling or doing jujitsu and you're like, oh shit, that was an arm bar. I could have got an arm bar right there. And by the time you realize it, it's already gone and you've changed positions. And then in about a year, you will be rolling where you're getting stuff, but it's going to take that long. You're going to have to invest that much time before you get to a point where your brain is just recognizing stuff and it's just doing it. Nobody walks out on the Rangers baseball team the first time, picks up a baseball and becomes a pitcher, but a lot of people, when they come in, especially if they've been doing fitness and they pick up a kettlebell and you're doing these things where you're doing a minute, with a set of double bells, they're expecting to be fairly good at it. Because when they're watching you or whoever's there, it looks fairly easy. They're like, oh, well, they're doing it fine. And then they pick it up and it's very discouraging. And that's the last time you see them.
Making it inviting is part of the process. And right, you have this guys that Drago, it's like, champion, it's like, okay, that's a big jump. So yeah, make it more accessible. I get, and again, that's the challenge, because you can't water it down, because then it's not the thing. It is difficult. It is tough. So that automatically is eliminating a huge swath of the population that I've heard it been said that we have a snowflake generation. I'm not sure where the timeline is on that, but it's there is a percentage of the population that they have an aversion to hard work, so those people are not really going to be transformed into kettlebell sport with that mindset, right? You have to have a willingness to experience pain at some level. So automatically it's not for everybody. If it was for everybody, then, it would have no appeal. So it is really already a smaller population. Same thing with martial arts. It's like, oh, well, I want to be a boxer, but I don't want to get punched in the nose. Okay, well, it's not reconcilable there. It has to be, I think, exposing it to the youth is probably the long term. I agree with that. I like the idea of the smaller kettlebells that fit the mechanics of the smaller person, that is makes a lot of sense. There's a shortage of coaches, really. There's not enough coaches that have and there's still, I think there's a little bit too much, I guess, arrogance in the fitness trainers, in the sense that, like, not knowing what you don't know. It's like, yes, you know a kettlebell and you use a kettlebell, but it's like, humble yourself and learn from other people that know things that you don't learn. It's like, that's something I've always done and I always believe in. It's like, just because I've been doing this for 20 years doesn't mean I'm not going to sit, with Rudneff, or even you, you're not even you, but you, Rudneff, Dennis, any of the greats. If you're going to do a seminar, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to take notes. And if I just learn one thing, even that's worth the price of admission, because it's something that I can now use and I become better. And a lot of trainers have, seems like, a hard time humbling themselves enough. It's like, oh, I have to be the man all the time, or I have to be the boss, because I'm the boss all the time. And I can't be seen to be, the student anymore, because I don't, and it's just like this insecurity that they have. It's like, we all have things that we're good at, and we all have things that maybe we're not as good at, and there's always room for improvement, and a lot of the influencers and trainers, they basically need a form check, and they're not doing a lot of the basic techniques with the precision that they should, especially considering that they're coaching other people. It's not just, oh, grab it and lift it. Well, there's some subtleties there, so I don't know what the solution is to that. But definitely the online, we're in a time where people, like, they want the information on their tablets, and it has to be accessible through the online portal. So I don't know if that means, more online competitions or blends where you have live and online. I think those
Better
have
start doing more TikTok kettlebell videos, I guess. I mean, honestly, that's where, but then how do you, like, make it interesting enough that you're getting the views or whatever to get that out to the masses. What I've taken from this talk, though, is that I need to start filming, like, mostly my butt. I don't know if it's that great, but mostly my butt while I'm doing kettlebell lifts. So anybody that's watching, we really need to start doing, like, more proper positioning for videos so we can get some more viewers for our kettlebell lifts.
Yeah, definitely. That's like a lot of it's pretty twisted in that regard, and it's like, knowledge is almost secondary to appear, it's like, you look marvelous. you know so I don't know how to overcome that, but there's definitely an audience for just good information, but it seems like it's the same people, right? It's the hardcore ones that you see at the events and you see working hard, and they're not looking for glamour. They just want to suffer in a community that are like-minded, so how do you sex up the message, or how do you make the message more appealing to the mainstream? I'm not sure how to reconcile that.
Well, maybe we can put that up. I've actually seen a lot of people that I don't know necessarily that have been joining into the Kettlebell Almanac group, which is really cool to see. So maybe that's like another discussion board we can have on there. It's like, really, like, how do we get it growing? How do we get people to enjoy, what we enjoy, and get them an opportunity to experience it. So Steve, go ahead.
People that know things that we don't know, and they have other knowledge, and it's like, it could be it's maybe someone that's not even in the kettlebell world that has the solution. And yeah, I think putting out this kind of question and this kind of invitation, like, what is your skill set and how can you contribute to the growth? And it's not just for one person's benefit. It's not just for Kim or just for Steve. It's for really humanity as a whole. Like, who wants to, empower themselves, because it is about empowerment. And you see that on a daily basis with the work you do coaching the people, people that come in and maybe they don't have a high self-esteem or a high, image of themselves. And then after months of training, after a couple of years of training, they're powerful, they're confident, they're strong. And that's what kettlebell sport, especially, that's what it does, you know. um and that's something everyone, can be interested in. So yeah, I think inviting participation in that regard is a good idea. I'm sure collectively the community has, some great ideas, and it could just be a series of small things that, accumulate over time. We don't have to just look for the home run on every on every play. We just need to get on base, basically. So, there's a lot of progress that's been made, but there's a lot, still a lot of room for improvement. I like, the Kettlebell World League. I think that's a great concept with what Dennis is doing. Is okay, you have your different comps, and at the end of the year we have kind of the accumulation of who's doing what, and it keeps people looking like, oh man, there's somebody over in, Cambodia that, did 3 reps more than me. I'm going to try to beat that person or whatever. So
Yeah, I think the competition part is like a really great aspect of it, to keep people involved. Not so, I don't know, sometimes you go to competition, like there may not be somebody in the category, right? So you're just competing against yourself, which is great. Like you should compete against yourself and always be trying to improve. But I think one thing that like motivates people is to like look over and be like, I'm not going to be at that competition, but I want to beat their number. I just want to see if I can do it. So I really appreciate, we're like at about 100 or 100, an hour and a half right now. So did you want to talk about your new jiu-jitsu video a little bit? I don't know if you want to give it a little plug.
thank you. Yeah, so I've created some programs for BJJ fanatics, and basically just sharing kind of where I'm at, where I'm in my early to mid 50s, and I love jujitsu. And I hear on a regular basis a lot of guys, especially that are, 35 plus, saying, oh man, I wish I could be on the mats more, but I need recovery. It's like at my age, I need like a day or 2 days recovery between rolls. And so basically I'm addressing that, where it's mobility for the older, BJJ athlete. And so I have 4 new programs. One is mobility for the older BJJ athlete, and that's focusing more on joint mobility and kind of working out the stiffness. Another program, which is flexibility for the older grappler. There is a distinction, the flexibility is the actual stretching, and that's different than just rotating your joints. Also important, especially if you have pain. Learning how to identify pain in your body and learning how to reduce or even potentially eliminate the pain. Combination of dynamic stretching and static stretching, where there's prolonged. So those are my mobility and flexibility programs. And then I have another program, which is unorthodox kettlebell techniques, and that's just bringing out less known. Most people know the swing and the clean and the press and the snatch and the jerk, but they may not know the the Sotz press and the 2 hands anyhow, and some of the other bottoms up and open palm movements and windmills and these types of what I call the unorthodox movements. And then the last new one I came out with is the mastering the fundamentals of the double kettlebell. So yeah, anyone interested can check out BJJ Fanatics And they also have, you know, a lot of sales pretty often. So if you wait for one of their sales, you can usually get like 47% off. So yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's also great, really, just even if it's not for jiu-jitsu, right? There's actually a person on here the other day that was like, I'm interested to listen to this because he didn't know of any other people that were doing jiu-jitsu that also do kettlebell. And I was like, there's actually quite a bit. You know, jiu-jitsu is a very niche community as well as the kettlebell community. And there's a lot of crossover with especially even with kettlebell sport and jiu-jitsu, right? Our sessions our time lifting is 10 minutes. If you're in like a professional jiu-jitsu match, it could be upwards of 10 minutes doing a jiu-jitsu match. So there is a lot of correlation, and people who are starting their kettlebell journey or their jiu-jitsu journey and needing additional mobility so they can keep training. So I think probably what you're putting out, I have not watched it, but Jake was telling me about it. So my husband also does jiu-jitsu, and we own a Brazilian jiu-jitsu facility. If nobody knew that, because I pretty much only post about kettlebell. But yeah, so that's like another part of our life. And you know, my husband also does kettlebell, and there's actually a number of jiu-jitsu guys that I've seen over the years that will start picking up kettlebell, maybe not necessarily training like in the kettlebell group with us, but have come over and like asked about like, hey, what can I do to get better? I think kettlebell's a good combination with what I'm doing without just like going and doing deadlifts and squat, and you know, that I can get like this extra strength thing, that portion that I'm looking for in my jiu-jitsu game out of kettlebell without having to lift super heavy weight, and also get the conditioning aspect of it. So I think your video probably correlates also both with people who are older, or even not old people that are older that are doing kettlebell, as well as it would for jujitsu, because mobility is mobility, flexibility is flexibility, and it can play a part in any sport that you're doing as you age, because all those things are super important. So I really appreciate you coming on, sharing all this information. I hope it was enjoyable for anybody who's watching. But yeah, I really appreciate it, because like I said before, like everybody that comes on here, they do it, just donate their time. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Any time for you, Kim. I really appreciate everything you do. And yeah, that's great. Keep it going. Stay well, and thanks for the opportunity as well.
Okay, make sure you tell your wife.
I will. I'll let
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.